And I think especially in today's society where we're seeing a lot of political strife and, these lines being drawn in the sand, it comes down to being able to trace an argument, be able to understand rhetoric, data, the results of some study, being able to interpret your own view of the universe rather than relying on some figurehead that happens to mesh with your cultural identity.
Hi everyone, we're back with part 2 of this week's episode. Today our guest is Dr. Andrew Forney. Professor Andrew Forney is an assistant professor of computer science at Loyola Marymount University, where he received his BS in computer science and psychology. He earned his MS and PhD in computer science at UCLA, studying under Turing Award winner Julia Pearl. From this background, the bulk of his scholarly endeavors combine elements of artificial intelligence, psychology, experimental design, specializing in a subfield known as causal inference, with the goal of better understanding AI through the lens of human cognition and vice versa.
I'm used to welcoming people to my own stream, so I had to break from that strip. No, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Yeah, of course. So I guess before we get into the meat of the discussion, if you could just talk a little bit about how this topic kind of relates to you, or how you're knowledgeable about it, or how you've worked with it in the past.
Yeah, sure. So I feel really lucky having grown up where my high school, my undergrad experience are really indelible, and I recognize that a lot of people didn't have that same privilege or had that same knowledge of really what they wanted to do before they got to undergrad. And since I was a wee tot, I was glued to the family computer. I'm sure it was obnoxious to have to share that with me in the house. But now as a professor, and even as early as grad school, I'm on the other side of the desk. And I see that not everyone knows what they want to do. Not everyone came to undergrad with those same opportunities. And as an educator who really wants to see every student thrive and eager to learn, that's a problem I want to help fix. So as for my expertise, I mean, my eyes really started to open when I started serving on our Seaver College of Engineering's first year advising committee.
Okay.
And this committee is one where you get to really take a very high level overview of all the different majors and STEM fields at LMU and get to see what are the struggles of our first year students. What are where are they falling short? What are the trends? And I also served as the registration advisor in our computer science department, where you get to interview and talk to these first year students coming into college. And you see that there's a lot of people that have these issues that stem from high school, and the calibration to an undergrad experience becomes one that either they weren't expecting or that they tend to falter with. So I think this can be a really meaningful chat today to address some of those issues.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that like I was pretty fortunate as well. My high school and obviously LMU had, both great sources of education. And my high school, even though it was public, I'm from the Bay Area, so the public schools were really good compared to most around the US. So I had a bunch of very interesting, useful classes that I was able to take, whether they're electives or main, required courses. That I feel like probably most high schools wouldn't get the opportunity to take. So like an example is I actually took an AP computer science course because we had like really nice computer labs and resources. But, I doubt most high schools offer a class like that. And even though I don't really, was a business major and I don't really use, the Java skills I learned in that class like right now, but I honestly wish I did, because I think nowadays coding can kind of be tied into pretty much any profession, and make it more, make you more capable in your work.
Absolutely. And that's one of the skills too. And when I think it's one of the struggle from the student's perspective when you're learning something is that you don't necessarily have perfect foresight. You don't know when you're going to need the tools that you learned about. I mean, when I was in high school, I did not like math, and it took a couple transformative classes in undergrad and beyond, to really make me love calculus, to love all this probability and statistics. And now I have to use it pretty much every day in teaching and research. And, it's one of those things where having a general education where you branch out, you're able to take in a wide swath of different topics. You don't know how that's going to fuel your efforts down the line.
Do you believe more student-focused vocational high schools provide more benefit than traditional high schools in their type of instruction?
Yeah, I mean that's a really good segue here, kind of related to what I just said, because and I think the answer is no, because that generality of education isn't necessarily a bad thing, because you don't necessarily know when you're going to need to have learned something in a class
Mm-hmm.
that you didn't necessarily want to take. So, like I said, I wasn't a fan of math or calculus until college, and
Mm-hmm.
had I not had that general education in college prepare or in high school preparing me for that, I would have been very behind when I realized that I needed it. And back to that, there's this idea that we have in AI in reinforcement learning where an agent is freshly exploring its environment. We have this saying that you must explore before you exploit, which in just means that in order to know what the best options are for you out there, you have to sample the many different paths that you could possibly take. And that's something I well learned in undergrad when, I think a lot of people have this experience. You don't really want to take your cores or your general eds. You think it's a lot of these wasted steps taking you in directions you didn't want to. But for me, taking my first psychology class sent me down a path where I just became fascinated by intelligence. And that's kind of what led me down the eventual career path of studying AI. So before you are familiar with what's out there and you've taken a deep dive into the possibilities for your scholarly development, how do you know what's right for you? I mean, we have college seniors that aren't sure what they want to do with their
Mm-hmm.
lives. To make
Right.
a rising 13-year-old choosing a vocational high school that may not be right for them, what do they do then if they discover that? So I think there is merit in the general education, but where there is certainly room is for improved specialization and outside exploration to help you exploit later.
Right. I think that, yeah, that's true about the need for people to try different things, and especially when it comes to those that don't really have like a concrete path, like you, for example, like you knew that
Yep.
computer science probably was your path from the beginning. So I think that's true. Like we need somewhere, or we need a way to explore a possibility to create those spaces for people that already know that what they want, and make it more specific for them. Because like even in computer science, that's something that I guess like you also realize is that you learn the basics that stood you up for like the very basic, but then like if you want to go into more deep stuff, you have to like really explore and get out of your way and like do a lot of research on your own.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
yeah, no, I that's it. Yeah.
yeah. I was like, this is kind of a funny analogy, but I would honestly like think that's similar to the idea of like tasting a new type of food. Like some people you'll like show them like a type of food, or they see a new type of food and they're like ew, but they haven't even tasted it, right? But then they taste it and they think it's the best food in the entire world, right? You don't really, I guess, know until you've experienced something. And also just like taste buds change. Like I used to, when I was a kid, I was like the pickiest eater ever.
Yep.
I have like an extremely like complex palate now, so like I mean, I know that's a funny analogy, but like I kind of think of it in a similar way. Like your interests and your passions and your capabilities of doing things grow. So I think a lot of, especially something like computer science, I feel like early on, if you were trying to learn it, it could seem very daunting and just like, past your reach. So you probably, it's harder for you to like something that's that difficult. But then as your intelligence increases, you probably are more and more likely to start enjoying it.
I think we need to circle back though. That was some pretty high self-praise for your palate. Like, what is the exotic food that you are deserving of this
Well,
acclaim for?
all right, compared to what I used to eat, definitely. I used to be like just straight, just like no, like I was so picky on fish and vegetables and just everything. But now, I
Yep.
mean, I'll eat pretty much anything.
Okay. Wow.
I'll at least try it. I'll at least try it.
Yeah. And you're totally right. Jokes aside, life is this filtering act where education is structured to start out general and get you more and more specialized. Because, say you choose and like computer science, great. Now there's cybersecurity, networking, artificial intelligence, programming languages. There's all these subfields that can demand your attention and that you can really dive into. And then you get into one of those and you realize there's even more strata that you can dive into. Look at
Mhm.
AI. There's machine learning, there's causal inference, there's machine vision, natural language processing. And as you continue in your career, as you figure out what's right for you just got to dive deeper. And I think a critical part of that is understanding, where do you want to start your descent?
Yeah. I think that one of the things too that you kind of reminded me of, just by like how like one thing leads to another, is one of those things, let's say, that's like more earlier on. You never know when it's going to help you in one of the other things that it's
Mhm.
like distantly connected to. I guess
So.
other than computer science, but we can talk about computer science as well a little bit more because obviously that's your field. But in general, what topics should be taught in high school that aren't?
Yeah, and I do apologize if most of my examples
No, no,
lean
no. It's
towards
totally fine.
my discipline. I don't want to
Makes
reach
sense.
too far and make an argument that I can't elsewhere. But yeah, so topics that maybe should be better taught or more available in high school. Uh, outside of just computing, I had a class that I actually took as a part of the psych major at LMU, called critical thinking. And I think, especially in today's society where we're seeing a lot of political strife and these lines being drawn in the sand, it comes down to being able to trace an argument, be able to understand rhetoric, data, the results of some study, being able to
Hmm.
interpret your own view of the universe rather than relying on some figurehead that happens to mesh with your cultural identity,
Hmm.
to give you your opinions. And I think it's a really important lacking aspect of. Oh, I think the Gardner's direct story. I hope you can't hear
No
that. But
worries.
okay, the even just understanding what a logical fallacy is, and
Hmm.
how to back that up with information, understanding the scientific method, and what a non-experimental method can tell you versus an experimental method. What is the difference between correlation and causation? What do confounding factors mean? All of these are weapons that can be leveraged by someone wanting to affect your opinion, with the assumption that they can kind of manipulate it at will. And I think there was even just just before this, I was reading a study where people can drastically flip their stance or opinion on some sort of public policy if
Hmm.
someone they identify with, a public figurehead, a politician, has likewise flipped their stance on it. So it calls into question this idea of, do we have a free democracy if the opinions of the voters, the masses, are just marionettes on the strings of those
Hmm.
who are pulling them, and they aren't able to make their own opinions. And I think classes on critical thinking, equipping someone to understand what arguments they can trust and what they can't, is something that's missing in not only high school but a lot of college curricula. I just happen to be lucky to have taken courses like that,
Hmm.
and data literacy as well, being able to understand what you can trust from some data, and what you can't. And both of those are kind of special cases of being more fluent in human psychology. And I'm not saying that just because it's my own passion, but you know being on the top of the intellectual food chain as humans, not
Hmm.
me, has, I think, made us really arrogant. And really, in a lot of respects, we are just apes with clothes on, running around thinking that we are perfect decision makers who are immune to sort of outside influences on our decisions. I mean, who wants to think that there is someone pulling the strings on the decisions they make?
Yeah. No,
But what we've
of course.
seen is that there are so many cognitive biases that people have that can infect your decisions. Even something as simple as the order in which some choices are presented
Hmm.
can have an influence on the one that you will choose. And knowing that, having an appreciation for that, understanding that we are fickle decision makers, sensitive to our environments, is, I think, a really important facet to understand moving forward, because it informs a lot of the decisions you make, how you contextualize arguments, how you interact with other people, and how we as humans think we tick. And I think that's really important to seed in as well. And lastly, I'll shut up. You gave a professor a pulpit,
No,
so that was
no,
your mistake, not
go
mine.
for it.
Is that technical classes in like programming and engineering, I think they're great. The options should absolutely be there at the high school
Hmm.
level. But where I'll contest a little bit is this idea that everyone should take a programming class, or everyone should take some engineering class. And because although that is something that you absolutely should be able to sample to be as a part of your exploration, what we see at the undergraduate level, especially, is that some people are wooed by the sort of glamour of computer, glamour of engineering, not really knowing what goes into it. And I think for those who want to pursue that path, they should have the option to sample it ahead of time, but we shouldn't make it seem like everyone should go this path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think the options should be there, but at some point it's a resources challenge. You can't have classes for everything single specialty that people want just because there isn't enough talent or monetary motivation to kind of keep that pull at the high school level. All right, I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, I just wanted also to mention
Christian,
and like to give some credit to computer science. It is a skill that a lot of people have said on websites and like multiple places. Like, yeah, people should learn how to code early. And well, I do agree with you that this isn't something that everyone should like immediately go into. But as I'm seeing it happen, like I feel like we are getting the tools to ourselves, like the applications and the softwares, and there isn't that knowledge of like the principle of how that got to you. Like it's more like I just have this tool and I happen to like use it and depend on it. Like for example, like companies like Zoom and all that. And like right now, it doesn't seem that significant that we like don't understand these tools, but like they're becoming part of our life to such a degree that we need to understand even like how they came to be if we ever wanted to do it one of our like ourselves. Because even like knowing the basic structure of an application, which we are always going to use like for the rest of our lives, like software gives you like more knowledge about like the security, like how you can make it better, how you can give feedback to the company, and like all those things that really matter. But like it's it's just like not presented in a nice way, because it looks like coding most of the time, like just
Exactly.
pieces of code. But it's more than that. There's like more whiteboarding, and like there's like exciting stuff that happens besides those like 20 minutes of like code that happened, that it could be like just with like 4 hours of thinking, like you had those 20 minutes of like figuring it out and like putting it all in code.
Mhm.
But like coding is just like 10% of it.
Yeah,
So, like, or like it's like a small part of like what really comes with it.
Yeah, and the psychology aspects, what exactly is happening to a user? What is the best way to lay out an interface? These are all broader questions. I mean, everyone kind of cites the social dilemma as one of the big exposés on social media use, but that too is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the
Mhm.
meshing of technology with society, and to pitch that as only being coding is a little narrow-minded. And just to refine my previous comment, I didn't
Yeah.
want it to seem like this should be an exclusive major.
No,
Anyone who is interested, I will welcome with open arms.
Right.
I wanted to push back a little bit on those that think like everyone should absolutely take a coding class, and
Mhm.
you're going to use this in your career, because you might not, but it's great to sample,
Mhm.
especially if you are hoping to make a career out of it.
Yeah. Kind of touching on both your points. Kind of personally, I am studied finance, and if you look at any kind of finance job, there's so many now that require you to learn or to know how to code, which I was completely thrown off. I like it didn't ever expect that, but there's a lot of jobs now that wouldn't even think ask for coding expertise, but they do now, just because it's kind of like worked into everything, or you at least need to understand how to like evaluate it or analyze it. So do you think it's important for secondary students to learn technical skills, or more like far-reaching concepts? So do you think I mean, we kind of talked about this, I guess. It kind of relates to like the vocational school topic, but do you think it's still important for people in high school to learn like technical skills?
So, I mean, by technical skills, you mean something a little bit akin to coding, or more mathematics or
Yeah, maybe more
formalisms?
something that's more like that's more usable in like your future profession, rather than like just learning it
Sure.
to learn it.
Yeah, I mean, I think your comment on like the finance jobs where there might be some programmatic aspects, and I think that maybe goes back to the idea of this data literacy. And what we're seeing is at a lot of different colleges right now is a little bit of a split where there's this new data science focus coming in. And it's really fun to watch because it's almost like how computer science emerged out of electrical engineering, where you started to see that machine learning, data science were kind of these woven into disciplines in computing, but sometimes it would be cast as a statistics or a mathematical concept, because it really is the intertwining of programming and mathematics, applied statistics. So I would say in terms of the technical skills and that data literacy aspect, um, even just being able to unlock some of the advanced features of like Excel. Like if you can dance around Excel, if you know how to do simple t-tests or some statistical analysis on some data, you can get really far without having to become an expert in R or Stata or SPSS. Especially for the sort of simple experiments that you could run at a high school level. And that too, is I think a really valuable um, experience as well, is actually to have a class where students run an experiment, or maybe have an experiment versus a survey, which is a non-experimental method, and show how the results on the same measures could be different because one's experimental and one's non-experimental, and then being able to do the analysis that would be that would reveal that difference. I think that would be a hugely valuable exercise to throw into the college curriculum, because that now not only do you have data literacy, but you throw in that critical thinking. You make them assess how surveys, confounding factors can infect those results, and where randomization, the idea of a randomized experiment can give you very different results. It can interrupt those confounding factors. And that's a lot of what goes into not only being able to, responsibly consume of data, but I think that helps you understand the world a little bit better, to understand, that we live in this wildly complex system of causes and effects. And when you run a study, you measure a very, very tiny part of it, where you're only able to control for some aspects of that noise. So I think philosophically, data literacy, bigger picture critical thinking, that would be something I would love to see seeded into a lot of different high school curricula.
I wanna really back that up with an example of this into practice, and to give credit to Dr. Forney, because I just want to mention one of the things we did in his class when I was at LMU, which was using one of the algorithms to like predict data, like using data. I think it was the rainforest tree. It was like it was some classifier. The point is that we learned something at the beginning or like during the class, and at the end of the class we had to use some census data to divide it into where half of it will be training the algorithm to like predict the outcome, which was the salary of the like each individual person.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And after like we tested it with half of the data, then we had to like make one that's the official one, which would be the practice data. So like we had data to practice and like to create the algorithm to make it powerful for it to be good with the other half. And then we were able to like predict the accuracy level. But like besides that, we all had to do it at the same time and like compete against like the accuracy levels of each one. So like that really comes to say that it is a good practice to learn how to put into one simple like experiment and project where you really measure the levels of understanding, because we went really deep into like what are the factors that would make a difference in the results. So that's just like one example that I wanted to give, and like this put into practice for like any teachers that ever listen to this.
Yeah, the whole idea in machine learning of a train test split, is when we train our machine learning models, it is very much analogous to how we as humans learn. That we have some amount of data that we study from. We have our notes, we have our textbook, we have in machine learning our training samples. And you want to separate those samples from ones that you want to test on or that you want to assess your knowledge on. Because in machine learning, we have a one of the biggest issues is what's called overfitting, where your model might be way too focused on the aspects of what it learned from the training. And it's almost like memorizing your textbook notes, right? You'll be really good at knowing any question that comes directly from the textbook. But if you have something that you should know, a concept you should know from it, that you should be able to extrapolate to, and all you know is the textbook, then you're not going to do very well on things you haven't seen before. Same thing like taking a practice test. You take a look at your notes, you study from them, and then if you're not doing well on a practice test, you as a human have overfit to your notes. You've memorized too much about um, what you studied in your notes and did not think enough big picture about what were the overarching concepts that connect these. So I think this is just another of those instances where we as humans have a lot to learn from our machines and vice versa, because they inform the patterns that we already see in human learning.
That's super interesting. I didn't know that there was a phenomenon like that worked.
Oh yeah.
Similarly to almost identically to the human mind.
Yeah.
So I guess the last segment of this discussion, I want to go towards talking about why do you think schools don't teach these classes or provide instruction on these topics that we've been talking about, and how do you think schools should change or could change to implement them?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is a really tough one, and I think primarily, almost entirely, this comes down to a resources problem, right? Because we don't have vocational schools, because in my estimation, it's good to have these general educations. You have to staff enough classes to make sure that you're not packing 100 people into a room. There's enough individualized attention to make that experience meaningful, and B, in attracting the right talent to staff these specialization courses, because especially going back to tech, it is very difficult to get someone to come back to education if you're a skilled programmer and full stack development, something about AI and machine learning, because who wants to take a job that'll pay 50K at the high school level when you can be making 4 times that in industry?
Yeah.
So it is really difficult, I think, to attract that talent back to the high school level at a level that they could afford, that there is a budget and our schools are already underfunded. And then to add to that, these really high profile specialization courses with enough breadth to not just shoehorn everyone into programming or tech is primary problem number one. If you had one mentor, a one-to-one faculty student mentor where they were experts at everything and they could instruct you on whatever whim took you at that particular point, that would be an interesting social experiment. It's definitely not practical in the modern era. No. So I'd say that's probably the biggest problem to address, and some I guess an answer to that, or some hope for a means by which we might get around it. Apart from raising taxes or something at the more policy level, is something that LMU and a few other schools have been doing, is partnering with some of the big names like Google to do. We have this CSSI, this Computer Science Summer Institute, and it's this 3-week intensive period over the summer before your first year in computer science, where you and a cohort of largely underrepresented groups in STEM, you meet in the lab every day. You go through not just lectures, but is this active learning paradisio, where it's this idea of you code, we code, or sorry, I code, you code, then we code. And not only do you learn a lot about what your discipline is about and a little bit more of the hard technical skills, but you get these bonds, you get this solidarity with your classmates before even day one of college. And they do other things too, like go to some of the local landmarks. They'll go to a Dodgers game, times willing. It was online this year. But something like that, a pattern where maybe you have some sort of industry partnership at the high school level, where the industry gets something because they get some philanthropy, they get some advertisement, they get to get their name out, their technical stack out, but then the students really get so much out of that experience. And it's not like there's a Google contract they're forced to sign at the end of it. It is really just this experience where, without a major tax to the school and its funding or its manpower, person power, you get these really great rich experiences for the students. And that's a band-aid solution, because obviously there isn't enough money or talent to throw around and time in the day to do that everywhere. but it would be really cool if that was taken as maybe a first step at a low level lower than even at the undergrad level. I don't have the
Yeah.
answer.
No,
I
yeah.
don't have the solution, but it is something. Some epsilon of difference.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I researched that topic, and I didn't hear of that answer come up in any of the websites or articles that I read about it. So yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting solution. I mean, it kind of wiggles around the restriction of like funding and like resources. So yeah, I mean, now I guess.
Absolutely is not the answer. That is just a one suggestion that came to mind from analogies of what we had at LMU.
Do you
But
think
yeah.
that this is something that's going to become more and more prominent and more common, or is this just like, why is, you said that LMU and a few other schools have done something like this, but why don't other schools implement something similar?
That's a great question. I actually don't have the intimate knowledge of that.
Yeah.
I suspect it too might be a resources problem. I mean, because in order to even host a Google CSSI program, you have to send faculty to an intensive training.
Mm.
And I think our representative who went there, I think it's either like a week or a few days. He had to fly to New York, and they had to have these training seminars, and that too takes a lot of money, talent, and person power, and hours of the day. So it might just be an issue of scalability right now. I think right now they're testing and prototyping at a variety of schools from a variety of different standings. LMU being a small private school, we're representing that kind of demographic group, and they'll probably go to their data, look at it, and see what what the pros and the cons were. I think right now it's a scalability issue, and because it is new and these programs are under development and review and refinement, that we will start to see a little bit more of that.
Cool.
I don't want to take this all back to computer science again and give it some credit, but I just wanted to say that if we, I guess, like if we kind of like teach students to like use the internet in a more meaningful, in-depth way, like all the knowledge is in there, but like there's a lot of factors that are not that hard to like break, that kind of like impede some people from like going deeper into some topics. Like it's just one general idea where like if we like teach people to like, or students to go more into like what websites to look at, what courses to, because like all the information is there for free, but like the sorting is not that good it's just like it's hard to do it on your own, but
you have to know what to look for.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that's a great point. I mean, I think the second impediment to kind of maybe knowing what you want to do before you get to college is the culture and motivation for learning. I mean, like you say, it's all out there. Google is your window to walk through whatever door you want to, or at least to get a sample enough for it to understand what lies ahead. And for me, and I should say for us in computing, it's so ubiquitous that door you could walk through is obvious. It's out there. It's something that is apparent as a career path and that you use in every day. Even just us talking on Zoom right now, you're using a computer and understand that these are powerful tools that shape society's life. But if you want to do something like medicine or electrical engineering, and you haven't had any experience with that in high school, and you don't even know that it's necessarily out there, Google doesn't do you a whole lot of good, because you have to Google. You have to use search terms. So I'd say there is probably a market for some sort of tool that introduces you to a wide swath of these and gives you reading resources and videos, and maybe sets up opportunities for that. And I think, going back to the high school discussion, it would be absolutely great if we had some sort of class that mimics the freedom of a college level capstone sequence, where you get to pick a project that you find interesting to you, and you get that period and time to work on it. I think that's one of the biggest things that's missing, that freedom, because the structure of classes at the high school level, just by virtue of what you have to cover and what boxes have to be ticked, really restricts your ability to own a project, to not be assigned something that someone else constructed for you. Because one thing you learn in a capstone sequence is that you are on your own. You have got to be the investigator, the one who has to go out and figure out how to do something you don't know how to do. And that level of investment, that way where you get to really envelop yourself in some project and passion, is sorely missing at the high school level. And I think that would solve a lot of the different boxes.
Yeah.
If you had the time to do it.
Yeah, I think that point honestly goes back to one of our original points in our discussion, and kind of might partially solve, people that believe vocational schools are better than, traditional schools, general education. That kind of allows students in secondary level to kind of dip their feet in both vocational aspect of school and then a general education aspect of school. So yeah. I think that's really great. But thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing some of your expertise and wisdom on the Cognito Show, and thank you to everybody who is listening.